first one.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight to this third public hearing, and the last one too, to determine rate guidelines in Westchester County for leases commencing or being renewed between October 1st, 2018 and September 30th, 2019. My name is Elsa Rubin. I'm the acting chair, and I'm going to ask my fellow board members to introduce themselves, starting with Elliot.
Thank you. I'm Elliot Cherson. I'm an owner representative.
I'm Feline Aqua, I'm a public member.
Eddie Mae Barnes, public member.
And as I said, I'm Elsa Rubin. I'm a public member.
Jean Anderson, tenant member.
Reverend Emma Loftin-Woods, tenant representative.
And our counsel, deputy counsel,
I'm Chuck Lesnick. I'm counsel to the board and deputy counsel for HCR.
and his assistant.
I'm Peter Stecker. I'm the senior attorney for DHCR.
Peter will also be the timekeeper for tonight.
I would also like to recognize Michelle Morales, who is our court recorder. And at this point, I will ask Chuck to make some necessary announcements that he has to make.
Okay, as we've announced at previous meetings, the Westchester County Board of Legislators makes recommendations for appointments to this board. And on May 21st, they recommended both Evelyn Santiago, who's here in the audience, wave Evelyn, and Gordon Highland, who's over there from New Rochelle. The process is normally that they are interviewed by HCR staff. One has already been interviewed, the other has not yet been, and that the commissioner makes appointments. I am unaware of whether the commissioner has made that appointment or not. I'm glad the potential members are here. They can listen. Should they be appointed in time, they will be able to participate in the deliberations. The minutes and the transcripts of the previous meetings are available so that they'll have full knowledge of what has transpired. But they're not counted in the quorum tonight, and since there's not expected to be a vote tonight, they will not be voting tonight, but neither will anybody else.
At this point, I would like to, before I call the people who are going to give us testimony, I would like to go through the rules and procedures to, just as a reminder. Most of you already know what to do. But has anybody who wants to speak tonight signed here? If anybody wants to be added, please do it so now. We will allow 3 minutes to individuals. Our Peter is going to be the timekeeper, and he will let you know when the time is due. We don't have too many people tonight speaking, so we are going to be flexible, a little flexible, not too much, so don't exceed it. If you have any material to give us, any literature, any handouts, please give them to Peter and he will distribute it to us. Once you have finished with your testimony, please remain on the podium in case we have questions or comments for you. And that's it. At this point, I would like to call Jerry Holyheim.
I'm going to be giving the industry final summary speech. Could I defer and be one of the last speakers, please?
Okay. So Rob Seitz, please. And he's representing the owners, correct?
I am. Actually wearing a few different hats here tonight. My company is T-Square Properties. We're a commercial real estate firm, and we are members of BRI. I'm an associate broker, but I'm also a tenant. I've also been a property owner, and I was sharing a story at one of our meetings, at the BRI meeting, and they said, please share this at one of the hearings. And it involved a landlord who I represented, and he was a very good landlord, which is not an oxymoron. And Joe was a relatively young man in his 30s. He had 3 children, very, very conscientious father, and a member of the community. And his goal was to buy three apartment buildings, one for each of his sons. And really it was, I'm hoping the income that will come from each of these houses, I'll be able to pay for private school tuition and college education. So the first year was pretty good. The second year was a downward spiral. And it began when, in his good-heartedness, there were 2 tenants, a mother in one apartment, a son in the apartment across the hall. The mother passed away suddenly and unexpectedly, and the son asked my client if he could move into the mother's apartment because she had so much more stuff. My client had no problem with that. Among her stuff was about 13 cats, by the way. And what my client did not know, because he was a relatively new landlord, and the tenant was receiving assistance from Department of Social Services, was that, well, he couldn't just make that move without paperwork. Also, when the mother passed away, the son was paying $200 a month out of his pocket towards the rent, and the mother always made sure she got that $200 from him in advance so that they could pay the landlord. Once the mother was gone, that was the last my client saw of the $200. So the man's lease was up, and it was a catch-22. Do I give him another lease? Because he was a real problem tenant, so it was like a no-brainer. But by not giving him a lease, he could no longer get services. He could no longer collect rent from DSS. That went on for about 9 months. He had to hire an attorney, and eventually he got rid of the guy. But that cost him, I was just doing some rough math, and my numbers may be a little bit low. That cost him close to $11,000 in lost income that he didn't get for that apartment. In addition, the fellow so trashed the apartment. When my client sent me a video of, it was like, I can't believe something like this could happen. Just the inside of the front door looked like it had been attacked by some sort of battering ram. That's what a mess it was. Plus all the cats and everything else. He had to repaint everything, he had to replace the kitchen, you name it. And his only savings was that he and his brother did a lot of the work. Similarly, the person who rented the apartment across the hall, when he vacated, I think her first month was the only month she was on time with her rent. She registered as being the only tenant along with her child, but soon after the child's father moved in, there were recorded abuses, reports of domestic violence, and it went on and on and on. She didn't pay rent for, 6.5 months. That cost him close to $9,000. He had to redo that entire apartment. Plus there were attorney fees that he paid to me. I did my job. I brought him a tenant. Unfortunately, he wasn't a very good tenant. When we got the other guy out, brought him a tenant, he decided to move out after 3 months. Again, my landlord, very decent guy, let him go, and even refunded part of his security deposit. Told him it was crazy to do because he broke the lease. He allowed him to get out. So the bottom line is that when I reached out to him about tonight, I said, could you just verify some of the numbers I have? And by the way, we're having my company is sponsoring an event on investing in real estate. He said, I am so in the red at this point. Buying another property, it's not even, in my wildest dreams. I'm about $20,000 in debt. There's no way I could buy another house. So I had shared this story before. I've shared it with county legislators, where it was so frustrating. We were trying to get assistance. We were trying to get DSS to return phone calls just to answer the phone. It was a very, very frustrating experience for him. It was a frustrating experience for me. And so when you hear of stories like that, and I'm a tenant, I pay my rent. I have a pretty good relationship with my landlord. I've been renting for about 8 years. But when I began renting after living in a single-family home, I had a landlord from hell. And she was so awful, I broke my lease. I didn't care about losing the rent. So yes, there are bad landlords. I was lucky this time. And I guess the moral of the story is that tenants have to be educated as well. If they want to live in a nice place, they have to pay the rent. They can't trash it. Because if they do, it does not allow the landlord to maintain his or her property. And if the landlord can't get a decent increase, mine just had a pretty substantial increase, 13%. But I was willing to pay it because my landlord's been a pretty good guy and he hasn't raised my rent in a number of years. But you recognize those expenses. As a former property owner, I know about property taxes, I know about school taxes, I know about county taxes, I know what it costs to take care of a house. And the bottom line is that as a tenant, even though I would not be impacted by this particular classification and rent stabilization, it's only fair to not only landlords, but actually the municipality. Just on my way here tonight, there was a story on the radio about zombie houses. Probably are all familiar with that, about how people just walk away. And that certainly doesn't help the municipality. So I hope you will consider my comments, whether they're valuable or not, that landlords do deserve a decent increase that's going to help them at least maintain their property and hopefully upgrade their property.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did we give you time as an organization? Did you give them an organization?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was supposed to say that.
Yeah, you were supposed to say, anybody has a question for?
Where's the location of your apartment? Where's the location, I'm sorry?
Where's the location of your apartment?
Where I live or my landlord's? Well, the landlord who I described, his building was in Yonkers. And I live in Mamaroneck. And I used to live in New Rochelle for about 15 years.
So you were speaking on your previous landlord, you said?
I was speaking the experience that he had because it was a multifamily. It is a multifamily, which is relevant to the discussion tonight. Right now, I happen to be in a single-family home. But I guess my point is that I know what it's like to be a landlord or to represent a landlord. I know what it's like to be a homeowner, and I know what it's like to be a tenant.
Thank you. Yes.
You stated that it was a rental property. Was it a rent stabilized property? Was it 6 units or more?
No. But I don't think that really matters because
It matters to us because
it matters to you because you are concerned yourself with 6 units or more. There's another story I could tell of a property here in New Rochelle, right up the street. It is 6 units or more.
well, we as a board, the Westchester County Airlines Board, our concerns are those units that are rent stabilized units. And that is a building that consists of 6 units.
I'm aware of that, but by the same token.
I just wanted some clarification.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you very much.
Okay.
I would like to call Tamara Stewart, representing the tenants.
Good evening, board members, advocates, and fellow citizens. My name is Tamara Stewart, and I am a tenant representative for Westchester Plaza in Mount Vernon. During this year's hearings, the suggestion of means testing ETPA tenants was floated as a way to determine which tenants can and afford to pay rent increases. This suggestion echoes the disturbing trend in our current national conversation, where poor people and people of modest means are increasingly being forced to prove how destitute they are in order to qualify for some type of government assistance. Whether it's requiring tenants to provide in-depth financial information to avoid significant rent increases, or demanding that people submit to drug tests to get food to feed themselves and their children. Demands made by people with means and power of those with limited means and even less power have become increasingly bold and invasive. I find these demands to be degrading, dehumanizing, and disrespectful. However, if we're going to institute means testing, then I suggest that Westchester ETPA owners be required to complete DHCR surveys and submit their tax returns to show their actual profits and losses, like New York City ETPA owners do, in order to get a rent increase in their buildings. Lastly, I'd like to leave you with a few important points to keep in mind during your deliberations. 1, shelter is a basic human need. On Maslow's hierarchy, shelter is only slightly less essential than air, water, and food. 2, owners are entitled to make a profit, and they are making a profit. Owners of rent-stabilized housing should not compare their profit margins to the stock market, but rather to that of other basic commodities like food. Food and affordable housing are relatively high demand, low-risk investments, unlike many stocks. The profit margin for grocery stores and supermarkets is generally from 1 to 3%. Many, if not most, tenants are renters by necessity and not by choice. There are large numbers of people in our state and in this country who do not have the financial means to buy a co-op, condo, or house. 4, ETPA was established in 1974 as a result of a housing emergency caused by low vacancy rates and high rent increases. Downstate New York is still experiencing a housing emergency. 5, the Emergency Tenant Protection Act was created primarily to protect tenants, not owners. 6, we have only to look at non-ETPA communities like Ossining, where gentrification is displacing longtime tenants and decreasing the diversity of the community, to recognize that ETPA protections are necessary to protect tenants from unscrupulous owners. Once again, please take a stand for fair, affordable rents and pass 0% increases for the coming year. Thank you in advance for your thoughtful consideration. Westchester tenants are counting on you to do the right thing.
Thank you. Please. Yes.
Thank you. I have a question about your statement that New York City ETPA owners have to show their tax returns or submit their tax returns to DHCR. I'm not familiar with that at all. What is the basis for your statement?
They're supposed to submit their tax returns
says?
down the city.
Who says they have to submit a tax return?
They have to show their profits
No, they
and losses.
don't.
They're supposed to.
Well, where do you get that information?
I will get you the site.
Well, I'd like to state for the board members, I don't think it's worked out. I'd like to state for the board members that there is no basis whatsoever for whether an owner is in Westchester County or New York City to submit a tax return. There is absolutely no basis for that whatsoever, and it's not true.
So you're saying they don't have to provide their financial information in New York City? Is that what
Tax
you're saying
returns,
about owners?
absolutely not. Does
But
Donald Trump provide his tax returns? No.
they don't have to provide information about their profits and losses? Is that what you're saying?
No, they don't. New York City, they don't have these surveys like we do.
Could I ask Chuck a question? Do you know anything about New York City submitting?
Yeah, I was just consulting with Peter because I'm not aware of any requirement either. I do know, and this was discussed the other day, that it used to be that if owners didn't fill out their surveys, then they weren't eligible for the increase in Westchester, Rockland, and Nassau. And there was a judicial decision in Nassau County that said that was too harsh and that we couldn't do that. The agency couldn't do that. So as a result, we get about, what was it, about 60% compliance? We talked about this yesterday. 51% compliance of the landlords. But I think it's more of the units because some of the landlords are bigger. Again, it's in the interests of the landlords to have as much information as possible so that the process is as perfect as possible. It's an imperfect process, but still 51% is more than statistically significant to be able to predict what the answers are. But we can really only deal with the Westchester Rent Guidelines Board, and Peter and I just deal with the suburban rent guideline boards, not New York City.
Can I point something out? In New York City, of course, they have a staff of the Rent Guidelines Board, and they present, sorry about my throat, they present every year reports, very extensive reports. They have a staff of people, an executive director. They're not landlords, they're not tenants, they are independent, and the Rent Guidelines Board in New York City uses the reports. Now, we all have, I believe everybody here has those reports, so they are not based on, there are no surveys in New York City like in the suburbs.
In New York City, there are over 900,000 units subject to some sort of rent regulation. In Westchester, Rockland, and Nassau, there are a total of about 35,000 units. So the state provides the support services in the form of Guy Alba and his shop, and they do the surveys and they're available. But Elliot is right. We also circulate the New York City data just amongst the board members so that they're aware of what is happening in the region.
Anybody else? Thank you.
Thank you.
I will call Jason Esquiciano, is that correct?
Yep. Good evening, board members. My name is Jason Schijano, and I'm president of Lovett First Associates in Tarrytown, New York. We are a licensed insurance broker with 49 years of experience and one of Westchester's largest brokers for the placement of real estate insurance, insuring hundreds of condos, co-op apartments, and rental apartments. We represent the area's largest insurers for real estate and are the insurance advisors to the Building and Realty Institute and the Apartment Owners Advisory Council, who have asked for my comments on the insurance market relative to apartment buildings in Westchester County. Another year, another opportunity to look at the DHCR survey and focus on the insurance premiums relative to allowed rent increases. The cumulative one-year lease rent increases over the last 5 years totals 7.25%. Cumulative DHCR reported insurance premium increases during the same 5-year period, 24% increase. These are DHCR reported numbers, they don't come out of my office. The ratio I reported last year continues to hold. Insurance premiums have outpaced rent increases by more than a 3-to-1 ratio. Though a substantial portion of ETPA tenants earn more or far more than Westchester's minimum wage, what's happening with the minimum wage laws in Westchester County is instructive. From 2016 to 2017, the minimum wage increased 10%. From last year to this year, the minimum wage increased an additional 9%. For the 5-year period 2016 to 2021, the minimum wage will increase an impressive 50%. 50%. Care to make the argument that minimum wage is not really applicable to ETPA tenants? Okay. Of the 64 employees that we have in our Terrytown office, many live in Westchester, and many make wages likely similar to ETPA tenants. Our wages in our office have averaged 3% or more in each of the last 5 years, and definitely closer to 5% for those that are earning under $50,000. Over a 5-year period, our firm's cumulative blended wage increase will be around 20%. Not as impressive as the minimum wage growth, but certainly outpacing the single-digit percentage that ETPA rent has increased during a 5-year period. There are a lot of different ways to portray growth, and I use the term loosely, of ETPA rent increases, which have averaged an anemic 1.5% per year over the last 5 years. Wages, as I have demonstrated, tend to go up each year. The cost of goods and services, even the cost of fuel, and certainly the cost of insurance goes up on average over time each year. And all of these things increase, on average, a lot more than 1.5%. Failure to increase ETPA rent in line with normal historic inflation can be characterized as many things, terms which I will not use in this room, as they're considered by many to be inflammatory. But based on other figures I've presented, 2 words that can be applied to these minimal or zero increases are unfair and unreasonable. Please consider a different course of action this year. Call it what you will, fair, reasonable, or just good data-based sense. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Comments? Do you have a handout?
I do.
Please give it to Peter. Thank you. As far as possible, I try to mix between tenants and landowners, but sometimes it's not possible. So at this point, I'm going to call Jim DeResta.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Gene DeVesta, and this is an equation which I derived in keeping with my discussion related to an algorithm that could be used this year for the purpose of identifying an analytically reasoned rent increase. The reason why I asked this formula to be presented to you is so that we could look at it very quickly. There's 3 pages. The second page following the presentation of the equation is a sample calculation, and the third page is a derivation of that equation. I will not go into the derivation of the equation because it's too lengthy, but it's there for you to appreciate and work through. I'm available at any time if you would like to discuss it. The key points of the equation involve simply the use of the landlord survey data, and in particular, the gross revenue and expenses. Those are taken right from the survey. The other components that you require for the computation involves a rate of return, okay, which is the ROI, rate of investment. There are several parameters which could be used. One is the compound annual growth rate, for instance. Another one is a return on investment that is typically favored by REITs. There are a number of other metrics which were included in my list from my presentation earlier. The other item is a cost index. And for that, you could use, for instance, the Consumer Price Index, or you could use the New York City Price Index of Operating Costs. The formula is very flexible. You put in parameters which you would discuss amongst yourselves, and with a simple calculator, out pops the rent increase. If you go to the second page, I took the liberty of doing some calculations using the CAGR, which is the average value 9.22 for 2017, computed by New York University Stern School of Business after evaluating 6,057 businesses around the United States of all different categories, which included real estate investments. That value that was computed to be 9.22. We also used the Consumer Price Index, current as of March 2018, which is 1.58. So you use my formula and you get 3.71 for a one-year lease. If you were to use New York City POIC, which is 4.5%, now it jumps immediately to 5.81. Interestingly enough, if you use last year's DHCR data, the number would be, for the increase, would be 3.5, suggesting that the profit from last year was lower. Now, I did an analysis, a comprehensive analysis. You know, it's shown on this figure. The profit growth for the Westchester market, as indicated by the DHCR data, is pretty clear. It's flat at about 2.7%. For the past, looking at the data that I had was from 2010 to the current data, flat, 2.7% rate of growth. There is no business that would recommend itself if that were the consistent rate of return. If you look at putting money into a savings account, currently, it's 2.5%. Why would I want to invest in real estate as a means to generate revenue to support a family? If this is the profit that I can expect, simple ratios which are frequently presented to you are incorrect as the metric to be used to decide whether it's a viable business. Simple ratios are not correct. That must be impressed upon you. I will stop talking now. If you have any questions about that formula, and this is a very, very simple version of what I am developing and hope to publish.
Anybody who did this?
Yes?
You just stated that. The return, I'm sorry, the return on a savings account?
About 2.5% CDs.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because, and the length of time for that CD?
3 years.
Or longer?
Yeah.
All right. But the rate of return for an owner that purchases a building first time is beyond 2.7% for 1 year.
The rate of return is based on the profit that the individual anticipates making. And when you look at the data, especially for the last 3 years, it's been declining, which means that the value of a property is either going to stay flat or it may even decrease. It's not based on the same metrics as you use for a one-family house. The objective of buying a rental property is to derive a revenue stream. Now, you could say, well, you're going to buy it, and then you're going to hold it, and then you're going to sell it, and you'll make profit X years later. But if you're a small landlord, like I am, I require that revenue stream. And if I'm losing money, I'm going to even have a hard time selling it.
How long have you held on to the property?
45 years. It's been in my family. So it's more than just a building that it's something I hope to pass to my daughter.
Anybody else? And please, if you're going to make a question, if you're going to ask a question, please let me know first, because I was looking towards this side.
I see.
Okay. Anybody else?
Maybe look down here, too.
Thank you. At this time, I'm going to call Dennis Harrington. Representing the tenants.
Members of the board, Mr. Stecker, people in the audience, my name is Dennis Hanratty. I'm the Executive Director of Mount Vernon United Tenants. Last week I spoke and I talked about the greater public awareness of the incredible affordability crisis that's being experienced by tenants throughout the country. As part of that, I gave the members who were at that meeting copies of 4 articles from the New York Times. Everybody got that? Elliot wasn't there, so he didn't get it, so Peter just gave him one, and I believe there's a couple potential board members in the audience. I prepared one for them as well. In addition, what Peter's passing out now is just a single editorial from this past week's Nation magazine, and Genevieve Roche is going to also pass out 2 major articles from that same article, from that same issue regarding the incredible affordability crisis that we're all experiencing, in which to some degree this board has been responsible for here in Westchester. I mean, I know before a lot of you guys were on the board, one of the worst things was when they did the highest comparable. 11 out of 12 years, the Westchester Rent Guidelines Board passed 100% highest comparability standard. And I had said back then to the then commissioner, with one swipe of the pen, they did away with affordable housing in Westchester County. Now, I know there's a lot of smoke screen out there coming from the real estate side about, and they focus on, you know, the small increases that have been there. And the increases have been very low recently, and that's well deserved. They should be low, there should be none. If anything, it should be a rollback. I just got the data just about an hour before I came here. The one thing I always talk about, as opposed to what most people talk about, not the individual increases, but the vacancy allowances. That's where the big dollars are. And I just did some quick numbers before I came here. And I want the board members, and especially the new people, to look at that. This is the changes in rent for apartments subject to the Emergency Tenant Protection Act, which become vacant during the reporting period 2015 to 2017. And they have 2 sheets. One is for previous rent by current rent with lease term of 1 year, and one previous rent of current rent with lease term of 2 years. So let's go to 2 years first. That's a little bit smaller. There was 250 units that had become vacant, and they have the numbers for it. The mean previous rent was $1,487. After the initial increase, the rent went up to $1,792. That's a $305 increase for that's the average for each one of those 250 apartments. You take that over 12 months, you're talking about an additional $915,000 in the landlord's pocket. An additional $915,000. Then let's go to the page before it, the 1 year. There's even more, there's 800 units became vacant. The mean previous rent was $1,633. What's the mean rent after the increase? $1,925, a $292 increase. Times 850, times 12 months, total increase, $2,803,200. Combined, the 1 and 2 years, you're talking about the landlords reaped an increase of $3,718,200. So while we're getting smokescreened by this thing about, oh, the 1%, how we're getting hurt, this is where the real dollars come from. I talk about this every year, it's the vacancies, the vacancies, the vacancies. I really want our public members and our potential new guideline board members to take that into consideration. This is where the landlords make a killing on vacancies. Look at these rents. The average rents now for one bed, $1,925. That's the average. Okay? For $1,792 is the average for a 2-bedroom. You know, they're talking about how people getting, away with stuff. Look, these are the average rents for new apartments. These guys are crying all the way to the bank. Don't play this game with them. I mean, look at this stuff and look at this stuff carefully. This is the DHR data showing this increase of almost $4 million right there. Just on the vacancies. Forget about the other stuff. Okay? That's my presentation. You read the stuff that we handed out carefully about what the crisis is throughout the state and throughout the country. Thank you.
Any questions?
Just want to ask, is that available to be circulated, what you just read, or no?
That's your schedules.
No, but okay, you were just speaking, that'll be in the transcript, not a problem.
What's that? This is the schedules, that's right.
No, I just wanted to know if you had a second handout with the numbers, but it'll be in the transcript, that'll be circulated.
Yes, yes.
Speculation, in other words.
Yeah, it's their numbers.
Your fairy tale.
This is their numbers. This is the landlord's numbers. These are their dollar numbers. Almost $4 million increase on vacancies.
Anybody else has a question or comment? No? Thank you. I would like to call Howie Rabikoff.
Good evening, members of the board, Chuck, Peter, and potential future members. My name is Howie Ravikoff. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this evening. Here's my story, and some of you may already know it. My family owns a 29-unit apartment building in the village of Rochester. We run a decent building. We care about our tenants. I do what my father taught me to do every day, service the tenants to death. The vast majority of our tenants understand who we are and how we choose to run our building. They understand how we differ from slumlords in New York City, and that we're not a faceless investor group searching for the highest possible return on our investment. But first, this evening, I'd like you to consider a timeline. I aim to show you that by design, this system can never keep up. Let's take the current year for an example. Landlords are asked every year to provide information, income and expenses for the prior calendar year. In 2018, we're asked to provide information for calendar year 2017. That information will get used, so we've been told, when a decision comes down from this board on June 28th in the form of a rent guideline. This board's vote will take effect on renewals beginning October 2018 and will dictate the increase for any renewal through September 2019. As you know, a lease renewal must be offered for 1 year as well as 2 years. A renewal lease that begins September 2019 could go for 2 years and end September 2021. Costs from January 1st, 2017 through December 31st, 2017 will affect rents from October 1st, 2018 up to and including September 30th, 2021. 4 years later. There is no way a single year's information can accurately predict what will happen for 4 years. The system is flawed. What you're being asked to do is ridiculous. We go through this process every year, and it gives us the impression that each year our decision has an effect on the coming year, a fixed small amount of time, because we do this every year. It's a dance we do every year. It just doesn't work that way. The effect your decision has is fourfold. Keeping that in mind, I'd like you to know the problem I'm currently facing. Given the lack of increases over the past several years, I have no savings for capital replacement. The slate facade on the roof of our building is falling and it's failing beyond repair. It needs total replacement, as does half the roof on our building. I can't recoup those costs in an MCI because it's not a total replacement. Thankfully, only half of the roof is required. However, I'll never recoup that in an MCI. If I could, it wouldn't change my dilemma today. I don't have the savings accumulated over the years to pay for the work because the increases haven't been there for several years. Second, I'd like to remind you about the tenant who lives in apartment 3G, a 2-bedroom apartment. This tenant pays $761.01 a month. The same apartment directly above her pays $1,733 a month. 3G pays $971 a month less. 43% less. The costs associated with both those apartments are market costs. Fuel, heat, water, taxes. They're all market rate. Yet 3G's apartment is below market rate. It doesn't make sense. Ideally, I would ask you to address those costs. Give me a tax break, give me credit, reduce the assessment on my building. I wouldn't ask you to have the tenant make up the difference. If the state is mandating ETPA, it's my opinion, the state should make up the difference. But you can't do that. You're not given that power. You don't have that authority. The only thing you can do within the scope of your power is to determine a rent guideline. So therefore, the only thing I can ask of you is a guideline that matches my increase in costs. So please, give me a substantial increase on the low rents. Allow me to keep up with the upkeep of my building. My third and final thought, I have a lot of conversations with the tax assessor's office in the village of Rochester. It's the town of Rye. And she will tell you that the assessments will have a blanket increase every year between 2.5% and 3%. No questions asked. No reason given. 2.5% to 3% increases every year. So if I can recap, the timeline you're forced to work with has a fourfold effect. Please don't forget that when you make a decision. Landlords need revenue to collect savings to afford future repairs. My future is today. I don't have those savings. Low rents need a substantial increase. And finally, assessments get a blanket increase of 2.5% to 3% every year. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions on this side? No? Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Now I'm going to call Jerry Hollihan.
Good evening, board members. I am Jerry Houlihan. I'm the chairman of the Westchester County Apartment Owners Advisory Council. And we're a trade organization representing approximately 300 owners of 25,000 apartments in residential buildings, subject to the Emergency Tenant Protection Act of 1974, commonly known as the ETPA law. Before I begin, I just want to comment on the last presentation by the Mount Vernon United Tenants. That was a speculative projection of what income would be had if those rents were based on actual rents. What was quoted were the legal registered rents, and the dollar amounts that were just put forth are all projections. They're never going to be those numbers. Please remember that.
No, they're not.
What you do have as far as actual numbers are in the first 5 tables of the HCR handouts, tables 1 through 5. Those are actual numbers. They're not projections. Tonight I present the owner's summary testimony for this year. I took the liberty of copying Section 2 and Section 4 of the ETPA law and included it in my handouts. Section 2 addresses the movement from regulation to free market rent when an emergency in housing supply ceases, and Section 4 addresses the considerations you as a board must incorporate in your discussions, namely the economic conditions of the real estate industry, the present and projected operating and maintenance costs of ETPA housing, and the cost of living indices. Your decision next week to set the rent increases for leases expiring at the end of this year and into next, as well as establishing a low rent guideline, will greatly affect this industry, which is made up for the most part of smaller owners. You have heard from our small owners tonight and over the last 2 hearings of the ever-rising costs associated with maintaining ETPA buildings. As Ken Nelson said in Yonkers, these are not the new residential developments sprouting up around transportation hubs and train stations in the county like here in Rochelle. ETPA buildings were built before 1974, typically 1930 to 1960, making them on the average 75 years old. Their maintenance and labor costs are constantly increasing. According to the HCR tabulations that you've seen and reviewed, they have increased 6.5% from last year. Our total expenses from last year have increased a total of 3.8%. The New York City Price Index of Operating Costs, which was alluded to by board member Elliot Shearson, has increased 4.5% from last year. Jeff Foster of Sprague Energy has testified that oil has increased from $45 to $71 per barrel from June 2017 to present. Jason Shishiano tonight testified that the insurance overall has increased 3.7% from last year, which is on your tables. In fact, the only decrease shown on the tables is the amount of the certiorari's that owners are applied for. Fair rent increases are needed to keep up with these costs so that our properties can be safe, clean, and appealing. Appealing to us as owners and appealing to our customers, the tenants. You see, the relationship between the owner and the tenant, for the most part, is generally amicable. It's a symbiotic working relationship where both are dependent on the other. We try to keep our properties as nice as possible so that tenants can be proud of their homes as well as their communities. But small owners like Carol Danziger cannot absorb the low rents or the low rent increases that this board has been issuing for the last several years. They have to constantly repair broken or faulty pipes, restore a boiler or hot water heater, upgrade electricity, fix a leak, point some brickwork, fix a parapet wall, paint over some graffiti, or repair a trip and fall hazard by replacing sidewalk flags. They also shine their marble lobbies, their stairwells, sleep in front of the courtyards, plant annuals and perennials around the property itself, replace a fence, etc. The list is never completely checked off. And there are also the issues of the subsidy programs presented tonight and earlier last week, like Section 8 and the property damage done by unruly tenancies as presented tonight, and also by the DeResta and the Mahankey families. The point is that there's always something to repair, and we willingly do it. These old buildings have charm and character, and we want to show good character by maintaining them. You were given various New York Times articles with titles like Eviction Machine in New York City, Weakened Laws and Fragmented Regulation, and Tenants in Brooklyn Plead for Their Homes that have accounts of tenants being forced out of their apartments by aggressive, greedy landlords, working fraudulently with dishonest architects and letting violations accumulate. These articles focus on areas in New York City like Brooklyn and the Lower East Side of Manhattan. This is absolutely not true for Westchester County. In fact, the only complaints we've heard are from tenants of Urban American Properties, an owner of 9,000 apartments in New York City and one high-rise in Mount Vernon. We are an organization of small owners, like the Cipotelli family, who want to keep their tenants, their customers, happy. Many of our small owners live off profits they make. But when the cost to operate a single apartment is approximately $1,100 per month, and you're collecting $400 in rent, it's impossible. That is why a low rent guideline is requested for at least $40 for those tenants paying less than $825, which is 75% of the cost to operate the apartment. There were articles and testimony about affordability presented tonight and previously. While we are very empathetic to this issue, it's not our job to solve this social ill. And tenants' living expenses cannot be considered as an expense to us, the owners. The testimony of 200 evictions per year is unfortunate, we know, but owners only resort to eviction as a last option. Payment plans are usually made in court or directly with the tenant before this happens. And I can assure you that we want to keep our tenants. We don't want to evict them. We have a business to operate. And if there is no rent collected or payment plans not honored or court stipulations fail, we have no viable alternative other than to repossess the property.
Mr. Holly, may I ask you to summarize?
Yes.
Thank you.
I only have about a paragraph left. It's unfair to put this burden on the owners. Better solutions need to be put forth by our elected officials. On Tuesday last week in White Plains, Professor DeResta presented testimony that focused on 3 issues. The concern and disappointment felt by most landlords defined as 48 units or less over the recent rent increases, rent freeze, and low rents that we've been getting are unacceptable. Your deliberations should utilize analytically reasoned approaches using the tables and CPI. The current and potential failures resulting from current rent guidelines' compassionate approach for determining increases. These strategies do not work. In summary, in order to maintain our older buildings, many approaching 100 years of age, both the owners and their customers, the tenants, will benefit from equitable and fair rent guideline increases. Therefore, we propose the following. Since the average monthly cost to operate an apartment is $1,100, and 75% of that is $825, and 5% of that is $40, we propose a 3.5% increase for a 1-year lease with a minimum increase of $40, and a 6% increase for a 2-year lease with a $60 minimum. We believe these to be fair, especially in the light of last year's low rent guidelines. Remember, your decision affects not only the tenants, but the health of the industry. Use analytical, reasoned approaches, not compassion-driven, to determine this year's rent increases. It's your duty as a member of this board to do so. And on behalf of the small building apartment owners of Westchester County, I thank you for your time.
Any questions? Thank you. Our last speaker is Genevieve Roach, representing the tenants.
Acting Chairperson Rubin and fellow members of the board, I'm here tonight to provide another year's testimony on behalf of tenants, but do it regrettably at serious disadvantage this year. We only received yesterday the DHCR's landlord survey results for the 2017 registration year, so it has not been possible for me in less than 24 hours to prepare my usual analysis and spreadsheets. I also understand the board has collapsed the board member presentations into the same meeting as the guidelines vote, so even if my analysis were put into the record by next Monday, there would be no time for the board to consider it meaningfully prior to the vote immediately after presentations. I'm not sure what to make of this. Nevertheless, I am here to make my best case for tenants. As you no doubt remember, it was the canceling of rebuttals to the presentations that was one of the reasons I resigned from the board in 2015, and also the reason I respectfully declined invitations by several public members encouraging me to rejoin. I ultimately felt that testifying before the board, rather than being on the board, was the best way to ensure that my analysis was provided to the board sufficiently in advance of the vote. This year, it seems there will not even be time for that. Nevertheless, at this juncture, 8 years after I began providing forensic analyses of the landlord survey numbers, public members understand all too well what the numbers inevitably show. Net operating income provides more than sufficient return to landlords without the necessity of any guidelines increases. This year is no exception. As the agency statisticians explained last night, the 2017 registration year net operating income was up again year over year, this time to 39%. Additionally, a fair inference can be made that with only 51% of owners responding to the survey, the profit numbers of those who chose not to respond would show even higher net operating income. The inexorable conclusion reached in hindsight virtually every year, that is, that each year 0% guideline increases would have been justified, is best shown by looking at copies of my NOI calculations for the last 2 years that show results going back to 2010 when I performed the first such analysis, and those have been distributed to you. Looking at this should give you complete confidence in rendering a 0-0 guidelines rate increase this year. The logic behind this conclusion is simple. As long as unlimited in duration MCIs, 20% vacancy allowances, and deregulation remain on the books, landlords are pretty much assured ever-increasing revenues, while tenants are assured ever-decreasing numbers of rent-stabilized units as apartments leave the system via these avenues of deregulation. As always, I remind you that it is not expenses and whether they rise or fall that should be determinative. It is net income after expenses that is what you should be looking at, in addition to considering all the public policy and demographic arguments that support keeping rent increases to a minimum. The lack of affordable rental housing has become a national crisis, exacerbated by the 2008 financial crisis that turned prior homeowners into renters, squeezing the already tight supply of affordable housing, which distorts market rents when there is an affordable housing emergency. Add to this the methods routinely used by New York landlords to force people from their regulated apartments and to deregulate units, set forth in excruciating detail by the New York Times 2-year study reported in the 3 recent articles you have already been presented with. And it is clear how increasingly urgent it is that you, as a board, help address the issue and do what you can to keep rents affordable. As discussed at length in a recent May 24th article in The Nation, actually 2 articles in The Nation which have been distributed, there is now a growing national movement to address the affordable housing crisis. A movement this board should embrace because you are charged with rendering a decision based on the facts and public policy. And I'd just like to actually, those are my comments. I would like to clarify something that Tamara Stewart stated before, and that is that by statute, owners have to file RPIEs with the New York City Department of Finance. And they do all of the analysis and provide substantial analysis that is presented to the New York City Board. So that is the basis of what she was saying, and it is based on statute. Thank you.
What is an RPIE?
The microphone.
Sorry. What is an RPIE?
It's the statutory forms that the owners in New York City have to fill out, basically with their income and expenses. It's submitted to the New York Department of Finance, which is the same department that receives tax returns. And they, as you actually, Elliot, acknowledged before, that staff performs an enormous amount of research that the Westchester staff does not have. But it is based on actual information from the owners.
They're not tax returns.
It is based on the information that the New York City Department of Finance has.
Right,
So,
but landlords do not have to submit tax returns.
they do submit tax returns to the New York Department of Finance. What I would urge the board members to go to the New York City Rent Guidelines Board website, and under the resources, they explain in great detail what information is submitted and how New York City analyzes it.
So if that was true, since Mr. Trump owns property, obviously, you could get his tax returns,
He doesn't own rent
which
stabilized.
obviously is not the case.
He doesn't have rent
No, what you're
stabilized.
saying
though.
doesn't follow, but in any event, you can make your
That's not true.
presentation next week. I just wanted to clarify that point for the board members that Ms. Stewart was making. Thank you. Any other questions?
Anybody else has a question? Thank you.
You're welcome.
That concludes the testimony.
I believe there are other people that want to speak. Alan Anziato said he was going to speak. I don't know if there's anybody else.
Oh, are you in the list?
I don't know if he signed the list or not, but
No, it's not in my list. You're welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Albert Annunziata, Executive Director of the Building and Realty Institute and the Apartment Owners Council. The State Controller, Tom DiNapoli, within the past 2 weeks came out with a study of a sampling of over 300 rent-regulated apartments in New York City. And he found that, unfortunately, many of the tenants earning 6 figures income and over were in place and basically hoarding the units from people who genuinely deserve the affordable housing. One tenant was identified as saying, so what, I'm earning 6 figures, I'm in New York City, that doesn't buy much, but I'd be crazy to give up that apartment. The other side talks about MCIs and vacancy allowance. What you don't hear is the other side of the equation against the landlords. Tenants can serve on the Rent Guidelines Board, landlords cannot. Tenants can have familial succession in perpetuity. So there are questions to owners, how long have you had your building? 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. The same could be said for the tenants. Tamara at White Plains basically intimated that. This family, 35 years in this apartment. This family, 40 years in this apartment. What's built into the law, just like MCIs and vacancy allowance, is the right of a tenant and a tenant's family to have a claim on that apartment in perpetuity. Nobody talks about that. So there are so many things that the tenants enjoy, and there are things that the landlords have to keep up their building. So there's a lot of talk about how many years have you had a building, what's the right amount of profit. Landlords are obligated to provide all their financial information pertinent to the operation and maintenance costs of the building. What the Napoli revealed is that tenants down in the city, just like up here, there's no income requirement. So it begs the question, the real death of affordable housing are the thousands of tenants who are in place and were locked in place, regardless of income, denying those affordable units to the people who really deserve it and need it, the low and moderate income people. So when you peel away all the BS and you look at the tenant side and the landlord side, what I have observed over these many years is that all the politicians who come here, and you know who they are, and they say, landlord's bad, tenant's good, zero guidelines. I've never heard one politician say, housing is a joint responsibility. It is a shared responsibility. Tenants have responsibilities, landlords. No, I've never heard any politician say, look, there are two sides to every coin. The stakeholders on both sides have to work together and cooperate and realize the realities of operation and maintenance of buildings. You know, nobody gets zero rent freezes. Nobody gets price freezes on anything. So I ask you, for as all the harping about MCIs and excuse me, my voice is a little hoarse. MCIs and vacancy allowances, think about succession. Think about, when there's a Section 8 lease attached to the apartment. What should happen is the person who earns more money over the years, that Section 8 lease pays less and less, and then that voucher can go to a family who really needs it. Now, that Section 8 voucher is part of the lease as long as that tenant is there or that family is there. And as I said before, that could be an awfully long time. So there are a lot of benefits either way, on either side. But you can't just arbitrarily say, the landlords don't deserve an increase and zero increase, and that's it. Because, somehow there's some kind of a gauge as to how much profit a person can make. So I ask you to keep in mind there are a lot of impediments on both sides, and there are some advantages on both sides. So let's look at it. I ask you to take a look at it as compassionately and as empirically as you can, to find some wisdom in the numbers and come up with a decent guideline for the owners. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yes. Good evening, Ms.
Good evening.
Annunziata. How are you?
You say that like a native, Annunziata. Perfect.
Clarify this, you stated information from the comptroller that is relative to New York City.
Yes.
Bring it home. We're in Westchester County.
Right. But, if I, yeah.
You also stated that from that information, the units are being accorded by individuals that are making six figures
Or more.
or more. You also mentioned that there are families that have been in their apartments for 40 plus years. Now, in Westchester County, did you mean, or in New York City?
Well,
I think that we
Right.
basically need to keep it relative.
Oh, absolutely.
Where we are, because we have to make our decisions based on Westchester County. Information from New York City, from Los Angeles, from California, which is what I have, and I'm going to present as well, is a point
Right.
of information. But we are responsible for Westchester County.
Reverend, I understand that. Unfortunately, the controller did not study a sample of apartments in Westchester County. But the basic benefits, the basic problem that exists in the city under rent stabilization does occur up here. And we heard the woman from Mount Vernon, Tamara, basically mention several families who were in place a long time. Now, since there's no income requirement either in the city or Westchester County income reporting, one can only piece together a picture as best you can, anecdotally, looking at the entire picture. And it is no secret, Reverend, that just like any system that can be gamed, that tenants who are earning very high salaries are, because they are in the position they're in a particular rent-stabilized apartment, ETK apartment, that there's something intrinsically wrong, something almost socially unjust, I would say, to have them continue to enjoy basically a publicly subsidized rent, whilst others in low and middle income brackets are truly in need of this housing. So the New York study shed a light on the problem, which does exist up here, but unfortunately the controller studied a New York City scenario, not a Westchester scenario. But the relative advantages and disadvantages within the law for tenants and landlords do apply here as well.
I hope in the future, whether I'm on the board or not, that when information is presented to the board, that we will keep it relative to Westchester County, which gives us, it enables us to make more informed decisions that, as you say, will benefit the owners as well as the tenants.
And Reverend, as you noted quite correctly, over the years, the tenants and yourself have brought in housing studies from California and Boston and other places, and national studies, all of which kind of pieces together a picture of the need for affordable housing. You're absolutely right. The inescapable parallels between the rent-stabilized units in the city and the ETPA units up here really is inescapable. It's really inescapable. Now, of course, one could go to the controller's website and see the whole report and get a sense of the colossal injustice being done by people of means hoarding these apartments and keeping them at the expense of people who really need them. So yes, I mean, listen, if I were the controller, I'd have a system-wide study of both the suburban counties under ETPA as well as New York City. But it should give one pause and some thought about the problem.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend. And I hope you remain on the board, if I may put in a personal comment.
Anybody else? Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think this does conclude the testimony. I would like to make an announcement for our next and last meeting, this next Monday, June 18th, Mount Vernon City Hall. And this will be the presentation of the positions of the tenants and the landlords, the owners' members, and we are also going to set the guidelines at the same time. I want to thank all of you for coming here tonight, for taking time of your busy lives to educate us and to let us know what we should know. It's really appreciated, and we listen to you, and we take all of this literature at home and we read it, and we take everything very seriously. That's all I have to say for now. And do I hear a motion to adjourn? Any second? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.